Welcome to the Obstructing Injustice podcast, where you join criminal defense lawyers on our relentless pursuit of justice in defense of the accused, and learn from courtroom gladiators who fight the good fight as we discuss the real practice of criminal law. Buckle up and get ready for the show.
Welcome to the Obstructing Injustice podcast. Our guest today is Oleg Fastosky. He's a criminal defense attorney in Maryland for Price Benowitz LLP, where he can be found in a courtroom fighting for his clients on a daily basis when he's not in quarantine. I'm pleased to see that he put on a tie where I just left on my polo. So still glad to have him given the extraordinary circumstances that we're all going through. But he did graduate from the University of Baltimore School of Law, magna cum laude. For 7 years, he was an associate professor at the Baltimore School of Law, where he was the head coach for the national competition team. He's also a guest lecturer on gun laws and cannabis laws, very frequently on those topics. He's also been an instructor at the Maryland Police Academy for constitutional law. He's very active in his community and providing pro bono services for indigent clients, as well as just overall community service opportunities that are local to his area. He gives back, like all good criminal defense attorneys, where the service first. And so we just want to welcome you to the show, and thanks for having you on.
I'm glad to be here.
Well, I guess, the first thing that I always go into with somebody is, this is a lawyer podcast, specifically a criminal defense lawyer podcast. Why did you want to become a lawyer?
It's actually interesting in this time with this quarantine and what we're dealing with now, in that I graduated from, finished grad school back in 2001. In May, I was relocated to San Diego by a biotechnology company. My master's was in professional writing. And I worked in the biotech field doing technical writing, marketing, very technical, scientific type of level stuff, nothing to do with law. And about 3 weeks after I moved out there, 9/11 happened. And when that happened, the economy was in shambles. Companies all over the board were being shut down, downsizing. In fact, even though I was based out of San Diego, one of the big overarching companies was in New York and was greatly affected by this. After several months of that company, I was let go with about 1/3 of the entire staff. And it's been a few years just kind of trying to find my way. And one thing I was very proud of was I was 23 years old, master's degree, ahead of my game, ready to go forward, and my life was stagnated. And after a few years, I actually just decided I need to take a step back, take two forward. My sister's an attorney, my stepfather's an attorney, and they both talked to me that said, you have the personality and drive that would go well with the courtroom. And I looked into it and realized this is a great opportunity for me. One thing that I want to do, so I moved back to Baltimore, where I was originally from, where I grew up, and went to the University of Baltimore and finished law school that way. It just drove me. Many students hate law school. They can't stand it. They can't stand the studying. I was different. I loved every second of it because I saw myself moving forward again. I saw myself going somewhere, and even those late night hours, the weekends, the studying, the cramming, all that was a means to an end that I wanted so badly that it didn't bother me or faze me, even though I griped along with everyone else about it. But that truly is just going to the courtroom, helping individuals, making them more of a difference than being stuck in a cubicle, drafting scientific letters and journals all day. No. Definitely is a much more rewarding experience.
Absolutely. So I guess the perfect transition then is, well, tell me about the beginning of your career. I mean, you were excited in law school that you could see that your life was moving in, kind of that purpose-driven area that, it actually made you excited to do all the work. And you're right. Most people are incredibly just not happy in law school, but you felt that purpose that was moving into, you knew what the end outcome was. And so how did the beginning of the career start where you actually learned the practice of law and specifically get into criminal defense?
Well, it has nothing to do with the fact that my first A in law school was in criminal law, although that definitely did put my attention to that. What I tried out for a trial team when I was a first-year law student. And typically first-year law students don't get into those things, but the individuals running the program liked what they saw, and I got selected as a first-year over second and third year students. And for 3 years, I competed in that, and I loved being in trial. In law school, you do a lot of paperwork, you do a lot of research and writing. Having something that's a little bit more real, a little more adventurous or combative was much more appealing and enjoyable to me. So I found myself for 3 years doing the program. By the third year, I was team captain, and of our two teams, we got first and third place, winning the regional competition with over 26 teams competing from law schools all across the region, including some very, very high-tier law schools that we basically handed their asses to them, which was quite rewarding in its way. And after that, they asked me to take over the program, which is how I became the adjunct faculty for several years, until family and the career kind of took over my time and I couldn't do that anymore. But even still, when I graduated law school, I had an appellate clerkship for a year, working for an appellate judge, or Judge Ari Davis, who has since retired years ago. But doing the appellate work gave me a lot of insight into what mistakes happen when a trial does not go right or wrong, depending on which side you're on. And when I finished the appellate clerkship, I actually had a few job offers, some in doing civil work, others criminal. And I decided that criminal was where I wanted to be. That's where I would be in court every day. That's where I'd be helping people with the type of cases I handle are far much more interesting, compelling, and a lot more real than a lot of the other things that are you're just a drone doing paperwork or pushing pencils around, which is why I was drawn to this area that I enjoy so much.
Well, I mean, it's one of those where I think you having that opportunity to clerk for an appellate court judge is really just an amazing experience. I was an appellate defender coming out of law school, and I tell everybody that I think that having that bedrock foundation of appellate law, having that opportunity, it makes you so much of a better lawyer because, again, like you said, you've learned what mistakes to avoid, and you get that 1,000-foot view of not only the law and a deep dive of as far as learning the research and really getting a better grasp of how the law is actually applied in real life versus law school. Because I think a lot of people have this misunderstanding that law school has lawyers ready to practice law when they leave, and that's just not true. You know, as we both know that the real practice of law is learned. Yeah, I mean, you learned more about how to be a real lawyer in that course that you had versus the actual substantive legal courses that you had as far as being on the trial teams. And so I think having that appellate background, without a doubt, in my opinion, is one of the greatest things a young lawyer can have. And so getting into your first criminal defense job, could you tell us about that?
I had just about finished my clerkship. It was about August of 2009. And I had a few offers on the table, and I actually had a job offer from a criminal defense attorney, and he was a one-man show. His associate had gone elsewhere. Actually, I think they moved away to a different state, to Pennsylvania. So he had an opening, and he and I, within the first 30 seconds of sitting down talking, he told me later on that I knew that he was going to hire me, and I knew I was going to work for him. And it was just going to court and seeing the things and learning. And he's exactly right. Law school gives you the tools you need to learn to become an attorney, not to be an attorney. Trial team helped. Being a clinical program, I was a public defender for a semester as well through the clinical program for the law school. Was also nice, where I actually represented individuals, had trials in district court. Of course, with the supervision of a barred attorney with a public defender. And of course, the judge and prosecutor knew that I was just a student, so they went a little bit easier on me. But it was still exciting to see that, to do the real life work. And you start out doing small things, the little misdemeanors. You work your way up and advance to the point where you're doing very serious felony cases where there's a lot on the line. And you only get that through experience. But having that, the learning curve. And one thing that the attorney I worked for, who's been practicing over 30 years, told me, it is the practice of law where you'll always be learning and always be better. It's not the perfection of law. So that's why you'll be learning first year and 30th year.
Yeah, I mean, it never starts. It's certainly an evolution. And when you look back at from those first couple of years of practice to where you are now, it's really mind-blowing how much you grow as a lawyer over time, and even the small things that, just make you that much better of an advocate. And so I guess what would be your advice to young lawyers out there? And you've been in that role for many years, where you helped young lawyers not only sharpen their trial advocacy skills, but just in general now as a private practitioner, somebody that's in private practice, which is it's a whole nother animal, as you know, versus working at the public defender's office or in different other practice areas. And so being a private practitioner for criminal defense clients, what would be your advice to young lawyers? And it doesn't have to be that niched as far as criminal defense, but just as far as young lawyers, what do you think is a critical piece of advice that if they had that and they take it to heart, could possibly change their career?
Never be afraid of asking for help or advice from those around you. Networking is so critical and important. There are going to be issues and difficulties and problems and mishaps and mistakes that come your way. And it's very unlikely you're the first person to go through it. Having a network of individuals you can call upon is so critical. In fact, there's a listserv that I'm a part of. It's the Maryland Criminal Defense Attorneys Association. And every day, usually it's about 20 people send a question. Sometimes I have a question. Sometimes I have an answer. And you network with each other to try to work together to get the best result, whether it's asking about a judge you don't know, whether it's asking about a defense strategy or suggestions or a legal issue, or even just staying on top of things such as, here's a new Supreme Court decision. Everyone read it. It affects what we do on a daily basis. Having that network is so critical rather than floundering or being afraid to ask. And there's also even individuals who you may think aren't ones to approach, sometimes can be helpful. And of course, depends. I remember when I first started with the attorney that I worked, a criminal defense attorney, I had never been in a circuit court case in my career. And the attorney said to me, go in and you have to get a postponement. The prosecutors agreed. We don't have the evidence. It's not a problem. The judge has set it in for an advanced hearing. It's going to be postponed. Just go in there, stand next to the client, say the date, and you'll get it. So I go into court. It's Baltimore City Circuit Court. And I say, well, I'm here for the postponement. We pick the date. Prosecutor said that's correct. And the judge says to me, very well, counsel, please advise your client as to Hicks. And I look at the judge and I look at my client and I have no idea what that means. So I tell the judge, court's indulgence. And I walk over to the prosecutor and I whisper in the prosecutor's ear, I'm just here for postponement. I have no idea what the judge asked me. What am I supposed to do? And the prosecutor very friendly whispers in my ear, oh, he's telling you have to advise your client he has to waive his right to a speedy trial because it's with past 180 days. That's his Hicks right. Oh, thank you. And I walk back and I say that exact thing to my client. He says, okay, I waive. Judge says, thank you, counsel, and we leave.
That's simple.
A very surprising advice and help. Now, granted, I wouldn't ask trial strategy of the prosecutor, but we are in a community. We've all been there. And don't be afraid to ask for help or advice or suggestions from the community. So it's important to build that from early on all the way through your career.
That's a perfect antidote. And and as far as that advice, I think that's incredible advice, because I've found in my career, every lawyer that I've ever reached out to for help, I've almost never been turned down. And I think that's a critical, and I think some people don't realize the value of those resources that are available. The South Carolina Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers, we have a listserv as well. And, my participation in that listserv, I think, definitely led to me being, when I was the president of that organization in 2018. And I can't stress enough to young lawyers to be active in their organizations that are related to their practice areas, because there's and just cold calling, older lawyers who've experienced, out of 30 or 40 years of practice in law, there's not many things they haven't experienced or haven't dealt with. And if you got a trial coming up, calling them and seeing if they'll brainstorm with you. And I've just found that the advice I've been given by, the elder statesmen it's been invaluable in my career. So that's great advice. And so as far as mistakes to avoid, I mean, that's advice is one thing, but pitfalls and mistakes that criminal defense lawyers make. Now, this would be, say, a niche related questions for criminal defense lawyers. What mistakes or, common pitfalls have you seen that young criminal defense lawyers make that, if you could go back and you could talk to your younger self and give this advice, like, don't make this mistake, what advice would be that you'd be able to give to yourself?
The biggest issue that I see with, and it wasn't even myself so much, because I've always been very, very detail oriented. the problem I see for many pitfalls out there is organization. Having a very disorganized, chaotic office or just firm is just going to lead to problems. Mistakes are going to happen, but organization is going to be the key, whether it's how to scan files in, make sure you file the requests, file the entries, communicate with the clients, convey things. And nothing's more frustrating when I'm in court and I watch another attorney and they're fumbling around for paperwork or forgot something or didn't do something, and it just makes them look bad. The clients lose faith in the individual and the attorney, and oftentimes it can sabotage a case that otherwise is winnable. It's very, very unfortunate. The other part too is taking time to speak to clients. Now, organization, people have their methods and systems, what may work for one may not work for another. But what needs to work and what is important for every attorney is to never forget that for the criminal law, when an individual, or it's the individual themselves or it's the family come to you, they're generally scared, looking for help, and want to leave the conversation feeling better rather than worse. Not a week goes by that I don't have a consultation, even if it's over the phone with somebody, and after the consultation is over, they said, thank you, I feel a little better now, or convey that they are a little more at ease. And then I always ask, when they tell me they've talked to other attorneys, have they gotten different advice? Have they gotten suggestions? And very frequently I hear one of the following is that, well, I've talked to other attorneys, but no one explained to me what you did. Sometimes they tell me the attorneys' names who they spoke to. And we are a small community. I know most of the attorneys who are focused and specialized in this area. And a lot of these attorneys are commendable. They're strong, they're smart, but the individual client doesn't know that. All they have is someone who brushed them off, asked them for money, and hung up the phone. That's going to be a problem because those individuals will end up hiring the person they feel more comfortable with. Additionally is that attorneys, even if they talk, there's an old sales tactic that says you have to create a sense of urgency to get somebody to sell, to get somebody to buy it, whatever you're selling, whether it's a car, whether it's a hairbrush, whether it's going to the store, and that it's true for certain things. But a criminal case, you don't have to create a sense of urgency. The urgency is there. The court case is scheduled. You can't avoid it. It's not like you can delay buying a car or rebuilding, painting a house or doing whatever. This case isn't going away. So you don't have to scare the clients, because often I've had clients call me crying because of the attorney they spoke to before they talked to me. And they didn't hire that attorney, they hired me. So never forget that you don't have to scare the individuals. Yes, there's always going to be a certain sales tactic, presentation, or polish that has to be conveyed. It's not formulaic like that, but you can't lose sight of the fact that these are human beings that are oftentimes terrified and need help. And we're not counselors as therapists, but we have to make these people feel comfortable and try to feel a little better about what's happening, the process, and feel confident in our ability to help them.
Absolutely. I think making that personal connection. And so these are, obviously, this is very tough financial times for especially young lawyers who have hung a shingle and went solo, and, given the extraordinary circumstances, this is tough. So this is crucial advice for you. I can't stress enough, and just to kind of echo what you've said as far as making that personal connection, treating them as if a friend called you asking for advice, not rushing them off the phone, not rushing to quote a price, but to hear them out, to listen to them. Most people just want to be heard. They're overwhelmed by it. And so if you make that personal connection and you build that layer of trust with them, most lawyers don't take the time to do that. And that's the best way to distinguish yourself from your competition, is that you're there to listen, you're there to help, and it's not about the money. Now, ultimately, we can't keep the lights on without getting to that part of it, but that shouldn't be the first thing you talk about at all. You should always let any potential client fully explain everything to you, what happened, and to get some follow-up questions before you even think about how long is this phone call or consultation in office lasting, and of course before you ever quote a price, because I think that'll go the furthest way in you establishing that connection that ultimately leads to you getting hired over someone else. Now, all right, so we have this part of the podcast where I would call it the obstructing injustice part. So which systemic issue in the criminal justice system bothers you the most? If if there's one thing that just gets under your skin, what major issue? We got, bail reform, junk science, jailhouse snitches, eyewitness misidentification. The systemic issues, the list goes on. What's one of the things that just sticks out to you it's your issue?
Yeah, obviously every attorney has a lot of them. One thing that really is I find prevalent and problematic, especially for me, is the abuse of the criminal system. And what I mean by that is our system is designed in a way where a victim can easily seek help. And it's if it was troublesome, you would have individuals saying, listen, I know they stole from me or hurt me, but I don't want to go through that process. It's going to be a colossal pain. I'm just going to let it go. We can't have a society like that. We have to make it a very liberal way where someone can get help easily. And we have that. The problem is it leads to abuses, very, very frequent abuses where people use the courts as a weapon as opposed to a shield. So you have an individual who is angry at her boyfriend. And so she calls police, says he just pushed me or slapped me or hit me. And maybe he has got a prior record. And like that, there's a warrant out for his arrest. And he's sitting in jail for days, waiting to get out. And then what happens on the court date, she doesn't show up, case gets dismissed. And nothing happens to her.
Yeah, and his life has been just thrown upside down.
And so it happens in some jurisdictions more than others. But so frequently, I see that happening, where individuals use the courts as a tool when they know, for example, the person has a prior history or whatever may be so. Everyone makes mistakes. But then, of course, we're dealing with a situation of they know that's going to happen. They know they're on probation maybe, and they call their agent. They fabricate something. And oftentimes it is purely fabricated, and we can actually prove it's fabricated. Sometimes I've actually seen situations where I have text messages from a alleged victim saying, if you don't pay me, I'm going to say you assaulted me. And then he doesn't pay her. She claims it, and we're able to establish he was working across town that time. Even with all this proof, even with all this evidence, nothing happens to her.
Right.
Nothing happens. And it's time and time again where it's not just, I'm going to quote the line from My Cousin Vinny, which is one of my favorite movies. I know where the judge says to Joe Pesci, Mr. Gambini, I'm not going to revamp the entire judicial process because you find yourself in the unique position of having a client that says they didn't do it. So that's one of my favorite lines. But it's not just my client telling me something. I actually have proof. I can verify where he was, what he was doing, that it was fabricated, and yet nothing ever happens. And so it's going to just repeat itself. And that's what happens. And those abuses are what bother me more than anything, because you have people who lose their jobs, lose housing, and have to sit here in jail for days and days and days, if not longer, over a fabricated charge, because these individuals know there's no recourse if they go ahead and file these charges, if they're doing so just because they're angry or upset at somebody.
Yeah, especially in the domestic violence context, as far as the spite of, because domestic violence doesn't have to be somebody that they're currently with. It can be, an ex. And I've seen it too many times where it's been a vindictive nature to use it, as you said, as a shield versus a sword. And hopefully at some point we as the defense bar can be able to get together and try to convince somebody to push legislation to at least allow there to be some type of recourse when you can prove that it was essentially like an abusive process on the victim's point of view. That would, I think, help as a deterrent. One day, right? Now, the cross-examination section, this is very straightforward, quick questions. You don't have to think about them very long. Just trying to get a little bit of this is kind of more of the fun section. So what's your favorite law-related movie?
Well, I can't.
I think you just previewed it. I think you might have just given it to us.
Yeah, I can't, I have a hard time watching serious law movies or even TV shows. I can't watch those. I can't because they take too many liberal choices and actions in those movies. the problem is if you're trying to be serious, you have to be accurate. And if you're not accurate, I find myself wanting to shoot the TV because you can't do that. You can't say it. I just get frustrated. But when it's satire, you can get away with so much more. Like My Cousin Vinny is the top of the list. Liar, Liar is another good one. Those
perfect.
are just, I can watch them over and over. And one of these days, I've been telling myself for years I'm going to do it, and I can't do it in a very serious case. I'm going to use a line from one of the movies in a court case. I did a little bit use one where I asked a police officer a question, and he answered with, "You could say that," and I responded, "I did say that. Would you say that?" Which is kind of Joe Pesci's line.
Right.
But I was very subtle about it. I think the prosecutor kind of gave me an eyebrow raise. That was it. But one of these days, I'm going to go full force, and I hope it's going to be recorded.
Yeah, that's amazing. What's your favorite law-related book?
I don't get to read many law books.
Transcripts, if you can count those, right?
I'll tell you, the one thing I do like reading are stories of innocence projects. Usually it's not really books, more like novellas where they're shorter or what have you. But hearing, we think we're progressive, we think we're advanced, and we are in many ways. But it wasn't that long ago when things were completely different, where individuals were being prosecuted, put in jail for nonsense and nothing and loose, weak evidence, whether it's racially driven or what have you. And it's not that long ago. It's in my lifetime it happened. I mean, I was born in the 70s, and there were cases even in the mid-late 70s I was even reading early this morning a case of where someone, I think the longest sentence ever, I can pull it was I have to pull it in front of my screen here. It was an individual by the name of Richard Phillips, who spent 46 years in prison. He's the longest person to ever stay in prison for a wrongful conviction. So, and he was convicted back in the 70s. And I'm reading over the evidence, and I just can't believe that, one, he was convicted, but two, he was even prosecuted. Today, he wouldn't even be prosecuted under these charges and the allegations and the evidence. But back then, in a very different time, he was convicted and spent 46 years of life in prison for a fabricated charge against him.
It's really unbelievable.
Enjoy reading.
Yeah, really unbelievable. And so, which lawyer in history would you want to meet if you could?
Well, probably it'd be the Supreme. Well, it could just be a lawyer. It wouldn't be anybody just had a trial. It's an individual who was a forward thinker that did a lot. And Supreme Court justices are obviously always one of the big things. And I'll tell you, with me, it was Earl Warren. Is one of the one that jumps out to mind. He was Supreme Court justice for about, I think it was like 15, 16 years, back from the 50s to the late 60s. And he was a very, very progressive thinker. And the one case that he was the center point behind was Miranda. Now, he was the one case that said individuals have the right to remain silent. And it's not just during the arrest, it's the entire judicial process. So he was a very liberal thinker, forward thinker. And of course, there were many individuals. What he thought at the time is what's commonplace now and is conformed. Back then, there was a lot of pushback. He also had Brown versus Board of Education, which was the desegregation of schools. And also with he was a proponent of permitting interracial marriage, which also was disallowed at the time. But in his 16 years on the bench, he also had other liberal thinkers at the same time, individuals who really set the stage for treating everyone as human beings as opposed to lesser than others, and also the rights of individuals who against the police state, which is also, that's very true to what I do. I mean, everyone says desegregation in schools, of course, it's how could you think anywhere else? But that doesn't affect me on a day-to-day basis today, whereas Miranda affects me and the work
every
I do
day,
and the individuals that I help.
Awesome. That's a great answer. And so we'll list one thing that you do that makes you a better lawyer. What's like one, it doesn't have to be anything that's law related. Just what's one thing you do? We've had people previously say that they do boxing, like fitness boxing. Other people meditate, other people go for a long run. What's one thing you do that you think makes you a better lawyer?
Everyone needs a way to break free and stress out. So non-law related. And I actually have I'll show you right here. I have it right here. Hold on. That's a broom ball stick. It's a sport that I play with my wife, actually. I'm a competitive broom ball player. It's a variation of ice hockey. You play in a rink, full helmet gear and everything. I've been playing for about 10 years. And I've traveled to Minnesota, New York, all across the country. I've friends that traveled outside the country to go to tournaments in Europe and even Australia. And I'm a very competitive player. I've played it on the national level and even won a national tournament a few years ago, about 7 years ago.
That's awesome.
So
that's
it's
great.
I do daily, and it's kind of rough now because I haven't been able to play in months since the quarantine, but I'm looking forward to it. And I have a lot of friends that also we talk about it and what we want to do when we get back into things. But that's what I do to kind of break free and collide with people and have a lot of fun playing it.
That's great. That's great. What would you do if you weren't a lawyer? What's your dream job? You shoot that moonshot and you could just say, this is the dream job outside of, obviously you're living the dream now, but
well, at
what would be the other dream?
My dreams of the NFL probably are gone just by age alone. I couldn't tell you. I mean, it's just one of those things where it's, I think about the individual, for example, who MySpace, who created Tom from MySpace.
Tom.
He just created a website, and when he sold MySpace for a few $100 million and then walked away, and of course then it tanked shortly thereafterwards. I've read a story about him recently. What he does is he just travels the world. He didn't buy a big mansion. He's not buying yachts. He just travels the world, spends a couple of weeks in a country, and that's what he's doing for years because he's a very just kind of laid back, down to earth guy, and he wants to fill his time doing things. So there's an old expression that obviously law aside, but you find something you love to do it for a living, and never work a day in your life. I feel a little bit about law that way. But if it wasn't a matter of that, it's just a way to, now that I have children, I'm married, and that family's important, be able to do all the things you want to do and find reward. There's a lot of ways to go. I'm not going to say be an actor, be sport, go into movies. It's all just a means to an end, just as long as it's rewarding. Because I could say it'd be great to be an actor, but I have no idea what being an actor is like.
Right, you could be miserable.
Exactly, I could hate it. So it's a matter of being rewarding, spending time with family, and doing what I want to do. That's all it comes down to.
That's perfect. All right. So this is how we end every show. It's our war stories. It's your choice. You could either tell us about a specific case you had or a specific moment. It can be funny. It's kind of the courtroom scene, kind of earlier, like when you discussed when, your first courtroom appearance and you were stuck with the judge. Ultimately, you knew was going to happen, asking you a question that, you ultimately wouldn't know the answer to. So is there a specific case that you've worked on that's the case that is your go-to in your mind as far as that you're most proud of, or, a funny courtroom moment, my cousin Vinny moment?
Well, I'll tell you, it's the proudest moment probably is not the funniest moment. But I'll tell you, there's actually two individuals I want to bring up. One is recent, that's fresher, so that's one. And it just shows how things play out. It was a guy, and this is an individual who was charged with felony drug charges. He has a prior record from years ago, like 15 years ago. Prosecutor first came to me and says, I'm asking for 16 years in prison if your guy wants to plead guilty. I said, you got to do better than that. He said, how about 14? I told him to do better. He said, how about 11? I said, do better. He said, no, I'm not doing better than that. I said, your case is weak. He says, I don't care. I think I can get it guilty. I'm asking for 11 years. That's my best offer. And for weeks, the prosecutor pushed me to take it. My client said to me initially, listen, if you can get me down to 7 years, I'll take it. He wouldn't serve it. He'd probably serve maybe 3 of the 7 and get out early release. And the prosecutor said no. And finally, it was the night before trial. And the prosecutor says, fine, I'll do 7. I talked to my client. He's like, screw him. He's dragging me out this far. Screw him. We're not doing it. We'll go to trial. I said, okay. Not guilty.
Love it.
Not guilty. The prosecutor, when it's over, and his case fell apart because it was just their key witness was terrible, and it went our way. Prosecutor's like, how this happened? And I said to him early on, like I said to the prosecutor, and I told him, friendly, your case is weak. You should have given me 5 years, which is the first thing I asked for, and he would have taken it. But I mean, that's not a person. It's not because the person didn't necessarily do something. It's more a matter the state couldn't prove it. And you have to go by the strength which is the case. You have to be fair. And I talked to another prosecutor in the same building who I had a jury trial with just earlier where my client was found not guilty. And I said, he wants 11 years. And she looked at me and said, so he wants a trial, right? Because he's not going to get that. And even the prosecutor that works with him said that. But that's just a funny recent story that I have. But the other individual,
The one thing I'll interject, the lesson I learned from that story, which I think if, young lawyers listening, the real key is you weren't afraid to go to trial. Night before, you were still prepared, that you weren't afraid to try the case.
Many attorneys are, and it's always intimidating. No matter how long you practice, there's always going to be those butterflies because there's a lot on the line here. Someone's life at stake. And which leads me to the second individual who I'll just mention by first name. His name is Raymond. And Raymond has had to hire me twice. The first time was about 9 years ago, where he was charged with first-degree assault, and the prosecutor wanted prison time for him. He was a security bouncer, if you will, at a club where a brawl broke out. And somebody took somebody, grabbed them by the neck, and smashed their head into the ground, messing up their face. And multiple individuals claimed that it was Raymond. And what happened was, all these individuals were drunk. The key witness said that at the very end of his testimony, that they saw, who they thought was Raymond do it. And then about 5 minutes later, police were escorting him out the back door with handcuffs. And the first time I heard this, in this case, like a year and a half to go to trial, was right there in the stand. I'm sitting there looking at him. And on cross-examination, I asked him to repeat it. He repeated it. And I said, so you saw the person in handcuffs, right? Yes. And the last question I had to this witness was, if I told you that Raymond was actually not arrested that night, was actually walked away on his own, and was only arrested the next day, if I told you that, you said the person who did it was in handcuffs. So you would agree that if this individual, Raymond, was not in handcuffs, he couldn't have been the one to do it. And the witness looked at me and says, well, yeah, that'd be true. And what this individual didn't know is that before he testified, the officer testified that he did not arrest Raymond until the next day.
And he was sequestered.
All witnesses had to leave the room. They didn't hear each other for that reason. And he was innocent. He absolutely was innocent. He didn't do this. And everyone was drunk. They mistook it, and he was found not guilty. And it was the right thing to do. But let's fast forward now, because there's a reason I'm bringing this story up here. Because a few years later, Raymond's mother called me up and said, Raymond's had an accident. I said, what happened? Well, he was on a motorcycle, and a car cut him off, and he flew off, and his girlfriend behind him died. And he was being charged with homicide, negligent manslaughter. No alcohol involved, and he was charged. He was officially charged, and now is facing a trial for the death of the person who was, his girlfriend that he was cared about. And the fact is, I pushed hard. I dug into this, and it turns out the car that cut him off was a pizza delivery guy that was looking for an address, slowing down, speeding up. And Raymond on a motorcycle behind him was, what's this guy doing? And he slowed down, no turn signal, because the pizza delivery guy was trying to find his address, had his phone in his hand, and then saw it and cut left while everyone around him, without using a signal. And that's when they T-boned. And here's how far we went in investigation. There was a Facebook posting about the accident. People were commenting. And I reached out to one of the individuals that commented. Her comment was, I actually arrived to scene and I was there. I spoke to the individual and they told me the pizza delivery guy tried to leave from this accident scene because he says, I have to deliver my pizza or else I get in trouble with my boss. That's how much of a, let's say, I'm going to use the word, the asshole this kid was, and how irresponsible and how just unemotional he was to the fact that there is two people lying on the street, one of which died, and he wants to go deliver his pizza. When I found this out, presented the prosecutor, their case unraveled, and they ended up dismissing the entire thing. So, these types of victories are rewarding, where you have a good individual. And Raymond has no criminal record, no history, has been working hard he's almost 40 years old, his entire life, and 2 times he's been accused of committing felonies and has to go to trial potentially to save his life. That's the rewarding part of my job, and that's what keeps me going. Yes, I help anybody, and I drive and work as hard for anybody that comes my way as Raymond. But I feel I stand taller, and I smile more often, and I feel better about what I do because of people like Raymond.
And it's really an indescribable feeling, anybody that hasn't done criminal defense work and been able to either hear that, 2-word verdict, not guilty, how sweet it is, right? But, or be in a position to get a case dismissed like Raymond's. It's really, it's one of the best feelings, and certainly indescribable. I mean, it's almost spiritual. Like you said, you walk
Absolutely.
taller and smile. So, man, it's just been great to have you on the show. I certainly enjoyed kind of going through your career and, your passion for defending the accused. Just glad to have you on. And, certainly, where can people find you if they need to look you up? Where are you at on social media, the website, that kind of thing? Where's the best place to find you if they need you?
There's a lot of ways that people can find me on Facebook. I have an Avo profile, Super Lawyers. There's, the website itself, of course, has it. Even you could Google my name and find it. Fortunately, with a name like Oleg Fastosky, I don't have too many others. Although there is another one in Maryland. I found him before. I know the guy. He's a little older. He doesn't do law, but chances are you just Google my name. And I'm kind of like Cher. When I call a prosecutor, I just say it's Oleg, and they always know who I am. I don't give a last name.
That's perfect. Nice. That's perfect. That's great. I mean, look, that's your brand, right, Oleg? It's
nice because not many Oleg people know, so it's nice.
That's great. Well, thank you again for being on the show. Now certainly if you enjoy our podcast, check us out on Facebook, and at Twitter, we're at Injustice Pod. Facebook, it's the Obstructing Injustice Podcast. Again, we got to do this is lawyer stuff, right? Disclaimers. This isn't legal advice. It's just general information. We're having a good time. Hopefully, teaching young lawyers how to be better lawyers and teaching the public what good criminal defense lawyers do. Try to get rid of that stigma that the defense bar has, because at the end of the day, we serve the public, and we're out there to pursue justice. And again, no attorney-client relationships created, and any past results don't guarantee future results. If you got an interesting case, if you got a case that you got a question on or an issue, you got any problems and you need help, you're in Maryland, call Oleg. All right, he'll certainly meet with you and give you time to speak. And so, again, at the end of the day, the reason we do this is the reason we get up in the morning, is to help people, and we enjoy it. And so, thanks for listening, and catch us next time. Thanks.
All right. Take care.
All right. Take care. Bye.